Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being these life healing webinars. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you, to the divine and every single person here for contributing to the manifestation of these amazing group or collective healing sessions, which are mind-blowing to me every time anyway. So I am just so grateful to be part of this. Thank you for blessing our time together with the ability, and I mean you, all of you in your divinity, for blessing our time together with the ability to work concisely and efficiently and profoundly. Thank you for the blessings of the ancestors and for the presence of the physiology as a result of the ancestors. God bless them. Without our physiologies, we just wouldn't have the perspective that we have on this whole situation. Thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom, whose role in creation is to anchor the flow of knowledge, the flow of expression of being in the relative. So God bless the holy tradition. All right. Thank you, everybody. Just get my, hang on microphone, just a little more. Okay, adjust it. Good. Very good. All right. So, hello. For the new people, what is energy healing? Energy healing is, I guess we can use the word technology safely enough. We could say it's a technology of consciousness, which allows us to use our awareness or attention, which is consciousness, right? It's the flow of consciousness, and to fold awareness or attention back into the field of consciousness, back into our physiologies, which are also comprised of consciousness, essentially, just very dense, and to use consciousness to affect consciousness, consciousness on consciousness, affectation, which promotes evolutionary transformation and results in the abatement of symptoms of illness, as well as amazing transformations and upliftments of the subtle structures of the being, the subtle structures of us. So we have our physical body, we're affecting with regards to physical symptoms, but also the deeper, more energetic levels of what and who we are also being affected by this process. I had this point that's been nagging at me for days to mention right in here. So as long as we're reviewing, I think I'll just go ahead and bring it forth. And that is that it's very interesting that it's almost like a little leftover from the last webinar that was about relationships, right? This is kind of a relationship thing. But it's very interesting that when we're with other people, the tendency is, and it's like maybe some kind of human tendency or something, is to reflect the people around us. And we do this probably with everything else too. We reflect our environment and our world. You know, if it's rainy outside, you might feel a little more dampened down inside. And if there's a wild snowstorm going on, you might feel more like invigorated and activated or something. So we tend to reflect, we reflect. And consciousness does this. I mean, this is one of the features or aspects or qualities of consciousness, is that as it's like curling back on its own nature, it's also reflecting. It's also showing. It's like, I see you and this is what you look like to me, kind of like that. So we do this as people, we do this. Now, what's interesting is, in my line of work, a lot of times I'm sitting with people who are having problems. So the question is, it's good for Dorothy not to actually reflect the actual problem. Like, it's good for me not to actually have the same problem. If I sat with each person and I was taking on whatever their thing was at each point, that would be not good. So there's another dynamic needs to come in, which allows us to reflect, allows consciousness to reflect on its own nature, to refer back to its own nature, yet at the same time to do so in such a way that the highest expressions of divinity continue to move forward or out toward the surface, whereas any aspect of that reflection, which is non-life supporting, doesn't make its way to the surface. So there's like a little mechanic in there. And I think for some reason or another, I feel like it would be good to look at that. And what I was thinking last night, as we kind of move into our review of yesterday, it was a very interesting healing at the end of the end of the session, we could say the end of the webinar. And that healing was so fascinating to me because it really pushed the limitations or boundaries of my understanding of how energy healing works. It was so far outside of space-time that we actually initiated the healing probably 10 minutes after the healing began. Like the part where we initiated the healing actually came at the end, which was so interesting to me. But what sort of carried me through that, because I was kind of being mind blown, my mind was boggling as we were moving through that healing. What anchored it, what made it possible to maintain stability through that very kind of, in a sense, unstable process of transformation, was that I kept going back, my awareness kept referencing back to the field of wholeness, totality, or silence during that healing session. And the silence acted like an anchor, like a stable anchor. And it also kept that process of referring back to the silence, kept initiating this little principle that I was just mentioning, which is when we're dealing with a system or situation where there's something that is not so great, and we want it to transform into something that's better, then what exactly is that mechanic that takes place that allows the preferred outcome to manifest? What is that mechanic? Because we all know, we've all been in situations where the cards were stacked a little bit the other direction, and we got into a situation that wasn't good, and then that devolved to a situation that was a little worse, and that devolves to another situation that's worse, right? Everybody's had that experience once or twice too. So we want to look at this element of the dive into silence and then the reemergence of something that's more precious, more valuable, more life-supporting, more in line with evolution, and understand how that principle works and how to enhance and support it, how to integrate it at every point in life experience and creation. Anyway, I'm just bringing it up because it's been sort of nagging at me for a little while. So you get my latest here in these live webinars. That's what these are for. So thank you for bearing with me on that account. We'll look more at that principle in just a minute. I want to continue on, though, with a review of yesterday. So there were a couple points that came up that were useful. One of them was that there's this cycle that's related to the expansion of consciousness, because that's the title of this webinar, right? Are the mechanics, exploring the mechanics of the expansion of consciousness. And we could also, instead of using the word expansion of consciousness, we could use the word awakening, for those of you who are more familiar with that term. Exploring the mechanics of awakening, the mechanics of awakening. And the purpose for doing that is fairly obvious. The better we understand, the better we are able to self-position in order to enhance and support. Okay, so this one principle came out, which was that there are moments of awakening or expansion of consciousness that give rise to cognition, and then cognition, it leads into a period of integration. And then from the integration, a platform is set for purification. And the purification, it has a kind of a effect of driving a person into the next cognition. Because the more uncomfortable we are in any situation, the more motivated we are to do something about that discomfort. And so the motivation to do something about the discomfort is frequently that impetus that drives a person inward, that causes them to look more carefully, look more deeply, to exercise the 4 legs of Dharma, right? Looking for truth, purity. The situation isn't good. What do? This one, I tend to clean. A lot of times in this situation, for those who live with me, they know that when things are going not so well and I'm not 100% sure what to do, cleaning is a good default. Just fall back into tidying up, because when things get tidier, then it's easier to see the truth, right? Also austerity, which means non-attachment, basically, not letting go. A lot of times in the purification part of the cycle, we have to let go of stuff. That's what purification means, right? It means getting rid of stuff that you don't need. And compassion or understanding. So we fall back on those 4 legs of Dharma. All right. So that's sort of like the review of yesterday. I might bring up all the cool visuals that I'm just going to bring up that box right now, so that if we need to refer back to some of the diagrams from yesterday, we can, and get that better position today. I realized it wasn't centered yesterday. That was a problem. Okay. All right. So I'm just feeling into the collective of the group today. And as we dive into the field of silence and into the process of understanding the mechanics of awakening, or understand the mechanics of expansion of consciousness, what we're really doing is we're really doing energy healings to promote a more effective environment, internal and external, I guess, environment for evolution of consciousness. The time is at hand when we don't need to be held back. We need to have a sort of full force forward for expanding consciousness as efficiently, completely, quickly as possible. So this brings me to one of the questions that came in. Let's see, I'm just finding it. Oh, actually, there are 2 things that came in. I want to do this one first. At the end of yesterday's session, a beautiful woman who was here offered me this nice quote. And the quote tied into the points that we covered in the session. So I wanted to share with you, I guess by way of a little bit more review from yesterday. So what it says, so this is a quote by Maharishi in 1966. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi being the founder of the TM movement, Transcendental Meditation. Oh, good. So he said in 1966, as we proceed towards much finer regions in creation, that means awareness becoming finer, the celestial nature of existence increases. It becomes more and more light. As the mind becomes more conversant with the finer regions of creation during meditation, all the time getting to the transcendent, to all the fine, this cultures the mind to experience finer levels of creation. So, and then naturally, when the mind is more capable of dwelling in the finer regions, it experiences all these celestial visions and light and all that glow. And he goes in to talk about fine beings of creation, which ties into one of our questions today, and different forms of beings, different forms of people. It also ties into yesterday, because we talked a lot about the web of life and the threads of consciousness, which have been in a sort of sweet coordination with humans for ages upon ages, but we are required some refinement of our perception in order to appreciate that. All right. So I was going to say, oh yeah, so this this other point, which ties into the healing, because we're kind of moving towards the healing. It's always nice to get into that point in these sessions. And this lovely woman from California sent me an email this morning mentioning the cherry blossom study. And I don't know how many of you might be familiar with the cherry blossom study. I can't see my little hands raised box right now because I've got another box up, but different window up. But just in brief, the cherry blossom study was one in which rats or mice were given an uncomfortable experience, a vibration of their cage, at the same time smelling the smell of cherry blossoms. And what happened was, over the course of time, the rats tended to respond simply to the smell of cherry blossoms by getting freaked out and stressed out. And then what was discovered was that this effect of being frightened by the smell of cherry blossoms then carried to 6 generations. Was it 6 generations of mice? Even though the 6 generations of mice were not exposed to the same stimulus. So the reason I mention this is because, and thank you, by the way, for sharing that and reminding me of that wonderful study. It's a very important piece of information and why we have to do so much ancestral work in the field of energy healing, because our ancestors lived in a different world. And they lived in a world where survival was so fundamental that there really wasn't a lot of time to think about the delicacies of the junction between the causal and astral level of creation or something like that. I mean, you know, they're just like, oh, I just need to like have enough wood in my fire that I cannot stay warm through this storm or whatever. So they were in survival mode. And they were leaning really, really heavily on their gross senses of perception. I'm checking into the Ancestral archive right now, and I'm just updating status for ancestors for everybody. So the ancestors get it, that what we need to do right now, this generation, needs to be a little more focused on the connections between consciousness and matter. So they're not afraid anymore. And for many of these webinars, the ancestors were really quite uncomfortable by the idea of spending time exploring these finer regions of creation. But they're not uncomfortable anymore. It's okay. I know, so congratulations to the ancestors. And after all, they're with us. You know, they're either back in the human form, in physical forms, dealing with the same kinds of issues that we're dealing with right here and now, or they're in the spirit world where they have a broadened appreciation and perspective of the importance of the finer manifestations of consciousness and how that affects and influences reality. One of the things that's happening is I'm seeing a healing of relationships between present generation and ancestors, particularly with regards to how we produce effects in our consciousness now that aspects or influences their reality. We talked a little bit about that in the last webinar as well. And a lot more about that in the last webinar. But to promote the healing effect that supports the ancestors maximally and helps to lay the groundwork or the platform for the expansion of consciousness in these bodies right now, in these physiologies. I'm just offering that intention into the field of being to see where to start with that one. Because the ancestors came up, being, that arose from the field of being is, oh yeah, we have to do something with the ancestors. So my question is, what? So I'm smelling the earth, and I'm smelling grass. I'm smelling plants of the earth, plants and grasses. There's hot water on the stove. Yeah, there are cups in the cupboard. Yeah, grasses and earthy, there's intelligence, particularly earth intelligences. So also then what's coming up are like earth intelligences, devas from the earth, and the intelligence of the plants and the awakening taking place in the plants. Oh, and the plants are also experiencing awakening or expansion of consciousness, but they're experiencing it from their perspective. And so it's very useful for us to share. Ah, yes, okay, it's all starting to tie together now as a wholeness. Thank you for bearing with me. All right, so you might remember in the last webinar, we talked a lot about blind spots. Ultimately, if we're talking about expansion of consciousness or awakening, we're thinking in terms of opening up the areas of our own being that are blind spots or asleep or non-functional, or our consciousness isn't going into those areas, and we want to fill them up with awareness and awakening and enlightenment and wholeness. We want to have conscious awareness in all the spots. The value of sharing this particular part of the healing with the plants of the earth is that they are experiencing life through their systems, through their physical systems, in such a way that they see things that we don't see. They notice things that we don't notice because they don't have eyeballs, right? So they're not they're not noticing the particular aspects of the electromagnetic field that we are through our senses and our ancestors. All right. So I'm offering at this point over to the plants of the earth, kind of like bowing down, you could say, to the intelligence of the plants, to that we are open to receive and whatever offering they have or whatever perspective they would like to provide for us to help the initiation of this particular healing that we're in. First thing coming through is on the feeling level and is sweetness. And so the first thing that comes through is what we all share in common. Even though they don't have eyeballs like us, what they do have is the ability to feel, and to feel feelings like, even complex feelings like love and appreciation. I have a plant in my house that I saved when it was dying. Someone had put it in a basement without water to die. It was just a little teeny boy, and now the thing is like, it's about 8 feet tall. And whenever I walk past this plant, I get a little wave of love from the plant. The plant's like, oh, it's you. Oh, thank you. You saved my life, and I've been so happy all these years. So the plants are absolutely capable of manipulating the causal level of creation with their feelings. And they do produce some of the same types of neurochemicals, not all the same, not as much as like our microbiome, but a lot of plants can produce things like chemicals like pheromones, right? They can produce different sorts of chemicals that are not unlike the types that we produce in our own bodies. So right now what's happening is a very sweet sort of loving coordination is being stabilized between ourselves and the plant kingdom. And also looks like a kind of like a promise or a dedication to work together in order to support each other's evolution and awakening. And we're offering right now, we're the first ones making the offering. It's noble to do that. And what we're doing is we're providing our own perspective of what it is to be awakened consciousness, what awakened consciousness is and what that means to us, and what the process looks like from the human perspective. And what that's doing is the plants are interpreting our experience of awakening of consciousness in terms of a light medicine, which is very nourishing to them. They like it. It's very soft to them. And it's interesting, this is like the second or third time since this webinar began last night that I'm feeling that same light medicine moving into our own physiologies. And what it is tending to do is it's tending to work today down through the lower portions of the body in the cord of light. It's working down toward the lower portions of the body, and it's having a very nice balancing effect for all the organs from like around the solar plexus area down to the pelvic floor. This area needs support. The plants provide hormonal support. Plants make hormones? I think they make hormones too, yeah. Yeah, so they're providing some perspective of understanding, because plants are very simple. You know, they don't do the kind of, you know, they don't write symphonies. Well, I guess they actually, sorry, no, they do. Plants have music too, sorry. But I'm just saying that like they don't have appendages like we do. They don't manipulate the world at the gross level the way we do, but they're extremely sophisticated capabilities among the plants to manipulate our world at the chemical level, Think about it. They take photons from the light that comes from the sun and they make food. That's pretty fancy. Oh, look at that. So we get to share. So we offered our perspective of enlightenment to the plants. The plants offer their perspective back to us. There's a whole volumes, there are volumes of information, like books, you could say. Oh, plants don't write books, but but they have recorded in the Akashic record all the information, the specific information of the way in which they manipulate our reality at a molecular level, at a chemical level, you could say, atomic and molecular levels, based on their profound understanding of the finest level of feeling and the causal field, how they work with the causal field. So it's all done from the plants. This is the download we're getting from the plants right now. It's all done through the causal level of their physiologies or of reality. That's beautiful. That is totally perfect because, of course, we know how to manipulate that area too, right? That's the finest level of feeling. So that's where we produce different feelings as humans. Our hearts, in the heart area, that's how we manipulate the causal field. We are every bit as adept. We can be every bit as adept at controlling the causal field of creation as the plants. We can create glucose from photons. We could do that. We get photons too, just like they do. Of course, we don't have chlorophyll in our skin, but I'm just looking at that process. Just as the plants produce subtle symphonies that are rarely recorded, so we can produce nourishment from photons, but subtle nourishment. So I'm asking being, is this the stuff out of which our light medicines are made? Because we make light medicines all the time, right? And the answer is yes. Okay, beautiful, perfect, beautiful. Okay, so what the plants are doing is they're reflecting back to us. This is consciousness folds on itself and it reflects. They're reflecting back to us the mechanics of our own nature to promote various waves of feeling which ripple through the causal level of our reality, which is a field. So an impulse anywhere becomes an impulse everywhere, in such a way as to produce various qualities of nourishment. The qualities of nourishment are, they're like our human interpretation of the infinite resource which is inherent to the state of absolute transcendental being, source of creation. So the source of creation is the source of all resource, right? But what we do is we are experiencing that unmanifest source coming up into our, constantly coming up into the manifest field, and then we're interpreting the quality of resource in terms of light medicines, in terms of feelings that ripple out into the whole field of the collective, the causal realm, and then give rise to, at the point where the causal meets the astral, they give rise to particular light medicines. Remember, I've talked a lot about the mist, which is in that gap between causal and astral. And the mist is can also be seen. Oh, it might be time for a visual aid. The mist can also be seen as light medicines, specific formulas. I'm bringing up the visual aid from yesterday. I had a couple of these different visual aids. This one is, this is obviously the Sombrero Galaxy, and I selected it because I wanted everyone to see that the entire astral field looks very much like this shape. At least this is the cognition that came to me in the last couple of weeks, was that if you look at the whole astral field in a shot, you come up with a shape like this that's anchored to being right in the center, And it's also anchored to being at the ends as the edges unmanifest of the threads. And it's all full of threads and threads and threads and threads of consciousness. That we get infinity at the outside and infinity at the inside, which then brought us to this visual aid, which is a picture of the way natural law distributes itself and is reflected in the hymns of the Rig Veda. And so, again, infinity on the inside and infinity, let's see, can I do it this way? Infinity on the outside. Oh yeah, it's a little easier if I put my hand forward. So infinity on the outside and infinity on the inside. So that's like taking the disc and putting it up this way, right? Many forms. It comes in many forms. And I just also yesterday wanted to define the difference between this form of the astral field and Hiranyagarbha, which is known as the golden egg of the universe, because the Hiranyagarbha includes the whole diagram, right? But this is just the astral level. And this morning I was looking and realizing it's possible that the astral field can produce forms like this. Oh, it can produce forms like this, many of them. There could be many astral fields, maybe not one astral field, but maybe many. When I ask being, are there many astral fields? Hello. I got, yes, there are many different types. It comes in many forms. This is a 108 pointed form. It's the Sudarshana chakra of Lord Vishnu. Oh, I'm pointing with my cursor. I have to quit doing that. Point with my finger. It's the Sudarshana chakra of Lord Vishnu, another form of the same. All right. Back to our universes. So I'm just looking to see how the plants feel about the astral field. Like, what's their take? And what's their comfort zone? Where do they like to focus? It's like they're saying just barely. Very, very simple. Very simple. Very simple. Not necessary like it is for humans. We need to have a lot more comprehensive understanding of the nature of the astral level of the manifestation of consciousness. Okay, very good. So thank you with deepest gratitude to the plants. I'm so grateful for their contributions of oxygen to our air and beauty in our world and food that we eat and everything. We cannot ever thank them enough. Cannot ever honor them enough. And the deva of the plants. Thank you. Okay, so we're coming back to the question of awakening or expansion of consciousness. And I was looking at, okay, like what's the role of energy healing in this process of awakening? Because people are experiencing awakening all over, and there are lots of beautiful techniques. I mentioned earlier meditation, and there are other techniques too. There are all kinds of techniques that are in the market right now for supporting people's ability to awaken consciousness. And I did a little review of the effects of hallucinogenic drugs yesterday, so you can go back and look at that one if you want to, from yesterday's webinar, early in the webinar, I believe. But the principle here is that energy healing has so much flexibility and can promote so many different types of effects that the question is, what is the best effect that can be used? What is the best way to use energy healing to promote expansion of consciousness? And the answer that's coming up was actually demonstrated in yesterday's webinar when we did that healing at the end of the webinar, where the healing itself was a healing to create some stability in the subtle physiologies of everyone. We were working with the astral through etheric levels of the physiologies and restructuring, or I would say just waking up structures in the astral through etheric levels of the physiology, which align with that refinement that I referred to. Just getting that back, get that quote back up here. As we proceed towards much finer regions of creation, the celestial nature of existence increases and becomes more and more light. And it means that the celestial nature of our existence increases. That means our physiologies become more and more celestial. They become more and more light. Using those photons again to promote light in the physiology. So I'm just looking at that and I'm feeling a nice, it feels as if our collective is waking up a very tender soup of a light frequency or a light resonance, which is the result of very, very soft, very, very fine impulses of feeling in the heart area. Did a big healing for hearts and for ancestors yesterday too, but a question came in from a dear man who's got some heart condition, high blood pressure, and was hoping we can go a little bit more with that today. So of course it's my joy and pleasure to do that. So this very, very delicate, very, very tender production of feeling in the causal level, in the heart area of the physiology. And I'm just looking at it and it's so deep. It's reminding me a little bit of the plants, that they work at a very subtle level, right? Plants are beings whose communication is subtle, whose life experience is very subtle. It's very delicate. This is continues to be the gift that we're given from those structures of creation, and continuing to give our love back to them. The act of flowing love back to the plant kingdom and to the earth intelligences of the plants causes us to, we've done this now once or twice now 3 times, we're doing this wave of love to the plants. What it does is, because consciousness reflects, it's causing our ability to produce a wave of gratitude or appreciation to the plants to become more like them, more reflective of the way the plants function. They are such a life force on our planet. They are such a beneficent life force, innocent, loving, helpful, always, right? That it's causing our own heart centers to expand into our own blind spots, to produce waves of sweetness, waves of love, waves of understanding, waves of gratitude and appreciation to the plants that suits the plants, that coordinates nicely with their very abstract, very subtle nature. There I'm feeling now the loops are looping faster. So we've got these loops of gratitude and appreciation running between our human physiologies and the plant kingdom. And with each loop, refinement occurs. With each loop, refinement. And what that does is it also offers refinement to the plants. So it's a healing for the plants, but it's also a healing for us at the same time. They're healing us, we're healing them. It's a symbiotic relationship. It's super beautiful. So soft. It's so soft. We just keep getting softness back from them. It's very nice. And the softness is driving or dragging our senses of perception into deeper levels of ability to perceive the delicate, ability to perceive the refined, the tender, the abstract, the barely manifest. The heart of a plant. How does the heart of a plant feel? Plants often experience the heart value, like we have big mahamarmas in our chest, right? So when we feel that, those loving impulses, we feel them in the chest area. But plants tend to experience these feelings more systemically. They have systems running through their bodies, which allow them to, many nodes in the plant's physiology that act a little bit like our heart chakras, kinda, where the feeling level is produced, where the source or the foundation of the feeling. That's why you can, sometimes you cut off a part of a plant, cut off a branch, and then another branch just grows. Kind of like worms, you know, they've got a whole bunch of hearts. So, I mean, not that one should. We should also always be very kind to worms, but, but yeah, that's why if you cut one place, then it just grows another part. It's that worms have multiple hearts. So it's kind of like that. This also ties into a very important blind spot for a lot of people. There's an important blind spot here, but it's finally getting some light. And that is that there are ways in which the causal body functions that supports and allows us to regrow tissue. Just like the worms, just like the plants. Looking at that right now. And regrowing, regrowing. Okay, so we're regrowing first at a subtle level. And the reason I mention this is that all those blind spots that we're experiencing in our human form, we weren't necessarily always blind in these spots. It's just that the nature of our human condition and the nature of our human reality, this three-dimensional world, it tends to be, there's a big filtering system. It's a big filter. And so the filtering system filters out the ability to perceive certain aspects of our nature and of reality. This is definitely going back to ancestors, and I see it going back about a century. So we're working with ancestors over the last century, maybe into the late 1800s, I'm thinking. Could be late 1800s. But there are blind spots that our ancestors were dealing with, which made them feel as if they didn't have access to their power as human beings. We're working our way to another question that came in. So I can see that, see that flow happening. There's a lot more that we do as humans with the effect, I would say the effect of the feelings that we produce has a lot more powerful, wide-ranging influence on the environment than we've given credit for, due to the fact that our ancestors were viewing only through their gross senses. This is the bottom line. So we're helping them. We're helping them understand there's a nice big awakening, and very, very fortunate for any ancestors who might have passed out of their physiologies by now, because they're in a position to really understand and appreciate the effects of the feelings on the finer levels of creation, because their senses are very refined without the gross physical body. They're not filtering as much as we are. And so they're able to see, to actually palpably experience the feelings that we produce. Okay, so this is tying in with yesterday's healing, where there was a big opening in the back of the heart chakra. That happened toward the end of the session. And I'm being guided to put up a different background. I'm having fun with you guys. I'm having fun. That kind of, yeah, that looks like Fairfield. That is Fairfield. The ability to move into the unknown is essentially the skill set required for expansion of consciousness. Because awakening, or expansion of consciousness, is the movement of awareness into an area where it was previously not. It means the integration or the stabilization. Now, we know consciousness is already everywhere. It's already in every corner or portion or area of creation. However, as individuals, our experience is ever moving into ever awakening or integrating consciousness, conscious awareness in these other areas of creation. Right there, right there, right there, right there, right there. Okay, this is happening. As I'm saying it, it's also happening. And one of the things that's happening is now the presentation of the presence, also of the beings who are responsible for the movements of clouds and water cycles on Earth, and these intelligences of the Earth, which are very much they're very interested in also receiving a healing from our group. The plants got a really nice healing from us. Well, this level of nature's functioning also is interested in a healing. So first, we just do what we do, right? It's very simple. It's like a little formula. We bow down with gratitude, deepest gratitude and appreciation for the intelligence of Earth that controls the waters. It controls the clouds. It controls the rains and the oceans and the great living, giving life force that is our ocean. And then I'm presenting that the theme of the webinar is expansion of consciousness, and saying that what we're really interested in here, what our healing collective is interested in, is how do you experience expansion of consciousness? What's it like? What's it like for the waters of the Earth to awaken? So astral field, very lively in the waters of the Earth. For the plants, they're like, oh, it's a simple thing. We don't do too much sophisticated or complicated with the astral field. But the waters, very sophisticated, very intense, beautiful. And what I'm noticing is many, many layers of history. In the history of creation, if we go back to looking, I'm messing with you guys, sorry. But if we go back to this, looking at the web of life as a whole, and we see that over the course of the manifestation of our universe, the feelings that have been recorded and experienced in the waters is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. So this is something that the waters know. They have complete records and logs and understanding and access to all the feelings. This is why we're working with the ancestors back about 100 years. Because there were feelings that they were working with back at that time that were innovative, very sweet at the time. For us now, it's kind of old hat stuff. It's kind of like old fashioned. But for the ancestors at the time, there was some amazing innovation going on, but it was not actually, it didn't get a chance to be fully integrated or fully recognized. So now, evolution of consciousness is high enough that we're in a position to make better use of some of these very, very ancient archives of information that are contained in the waters. So the waters are offering to us is access to their archives. Well, that's rich. That is rich. That is wonderful stuff. There's so much there. Yeah, as we know from the work of Dr. Emoto, the waters are able to recognize and record the feelings. They also work with the plants. The plants are their emissaries to a certain degree, and the plants are able to translate the feelings in the waters. The plants experience the feelings from the waters. The rain makes them grow, but then they're able to translate that into various types of chemicals that communicate with our physical bodies and can have a tremendous uplifting, life-supporting, holistic effect for us. So through the plants and through their relationship with the waters, we again offer our gratitude and support and let that feeling of adoration and reverence for this system fall in or take rest in the field of being, in the field of inner silence, source of creation, which is the source of all of it. So now what we're seeing is that divinity is playing this game where it's folding in on its own nature, and it's created a construct of a world for us. It's got water, it's got plants, it's got lots of other things too, air and so forth. And it's done this in order to promote loops of its own self-expression that allow it to understand its own nature. So in gratitude for that, we're going to offer that gratitude also back to the field of silence. So now what's happening is when we offer that loving gratitude and reverence back to the divine, what happens is its divinity, self-nurturing divinity, the love that flows through our own beings. And remember, everybody, with this awakening that took place in the back of the chest, it was in yesterday's webinar, but everybody from today also gets that healing. I don't have time to re-describe the whole thing. It's okay. Don't worry, everybody's getting it anyway. That, that was a big one. It took a few minutes to describe. It's actually utilizing, or I would say harnessing, the capacity of the heart Mahamarma area to implement this loop of divinity looping back onto its own nature and nurturing itself. We're using these threads of the astral field, which are radiating out of the back, out of the middle of the back, right behind the heart chakra, to enhance that effect for divinity. So divine being is self-interacting, and it is bringing, it's like lifting itself up by its bootstraps, basically, and we are part of that process. We're engaging, as are the plants, as are the waters of our world and everything else, and we're doing it through this structure that we've created. We've restructured our subtle field, the astral level of our physiologies, in order to better reflect the precise nature of divinity. In so doing, we are now better capable of being a part of the divine interaction or the divine play of creation in a way which is really, really powerful and really, really effective. So this love and reverence that flows from our hearts to the divine, which is basically divinity self-interacting, is filtering through those threads of the astral body, which are in the back of and I'm seeing also here in the crown, there's another one like that. At the crown, we talked about that yesterday. I was teasing my husband this morning and saying, yeah, get your free healing for angel wings and a halo right here. Sorry. Anyway, I don't mean to lower it to some sort of, but no, it's important. It's important to go to every level of creation. It's important for this healing, this self-nurturing, this ability for divinity to self-nurture. Oh, this is beautiful. I had to say that. I had to pretend to be a circus salesman, because that's where the dark, and I'm not just saying, not circuses. Circuses are lovely and they're fun and they're designed to be uplifting. Thank you. We all appreciate circuses for what they are as shows of human creativity, ingenuity, and diversity. But what's important is that I was wondering when the dark energies were going to show their face, right? And so this leads into this other question by another really sweet lady brought in this question the other day, that at night especially, she feels the influence of really dark energy. She feels victimized, watched, exploited, harassed, used. There's like feelings of dark unseen forces and stuff. And she's like, how do I deal with this? Everything in creation is rising to enlightenment. Everything in creation is attempting to reach out and become a perfect expression of divinity, of divine being, of the source of creation. But because the source of creation is unmanifest and qualityless, that is not the easiest thing in the world to do. And of course, it's interesting because we take that on as a challenge, right? The divinity has produced or created a reality which covers its own nature, which hides the sweetness and the perfection of the absolute. And then the goal is to find one's way back to the absolute. But for some structures in creation, that's harder than others. This amazing loop of love that we are creating in our collective, that's translating out the back, is powerful enough to move into one of the big dark blind spots of our reality. So let's go in and analyze. I'm going to see just what's in there. Always in the areas, or we could say the modes of the causal field. So like angelic structures are modes of the causal field, and then dark structures are also modes of the causal field. The dark structures in the causal field, their nature is to utilize illusion. And so what they're doing is they're leveraging the nature of consciousness to reflect. And what they do is they put up a wall of illusion, and then we reflect that illusion. And then what that does is it places us out of alignment with truth. And when we go out of alignment with truth, then we're more vulnerable, and a lot of the sweetness and the resource that flows through the human physiology then becomes accessible to kind of channel into particular areas, of the causal field that are responsible for creating dark spots and blind spots and more illusion. But even those aspects of creation want to evolve, and even those aspects of creation want to ultimately reflect the light of divine being. We now have a strength, and I'm getting the message. We shouldn't be too cocky with our strength, which is okay. So I'm noting that, and but we now have this strength that our own impulses of sweetness, acceptance, love, forgiveness, protection, alignment with the four legs of Dharma, right, is able to channel through these waves of light that are coming out back of the physiology. And as they do that, it's like we have a more direct link to divinity. So the impulses that we create, like we create an impulse and it goes like this, it ripples through the causal field. It's able to ripple to the causal field and then also maintain integration with the source of creation. This is a new thing. And I'm just analyzing because that healing came up yesterday, and I'm like, where is this going to go? In fact, someone else said that to me in an email this morning. They're like, that was such an amazing healing. Where is this going to go today? So this is where it's going, is that it's like oiling up the junction between para-prakriti, unmanifest being, and the causal field. And we are doing it. This is what we are doing when we experience our deep reverence and gratitude to divinity for using the human condition or the plant condition or the cloud condition as a vehicle for its own evolution, we can say. And you can say, well, the source of creation, there is no evolution because it's all that is, it's all that ever was. There's nothing more. There's nothing more that you can add to that. But the fact that we're sitting here in front of our computers in our human body means there's more. There actually is more. That it's a kind of a play. The more is a play. That there is a part of that unmanifest self which doesn't change at all, but then there's the entire dynamic, upheavalish evolution of the universe that is also reality. And so in that, there is more. And that is where the unchanging, unmoving source of creation experiences expansion of consciousness. It experiences itself becoming more its own nature. So what we're doing is by participating in this loop where now this is a shift. It's like a permanent shift. My husband was asking me this morning too. He's like, we do these healings, but then what? And the thing is that we are actually not only understanding the nature of our subtle field with much more detail, but then once we understand it, it becomes integrated. And then there is a permanent change. First, it's a permanent change on the physical material level, but then it becomes expressed. So this change of the awareness that out the back of the heart chakra, there are all these threads of consciousness, and I'm seeing that also starting to integrate up into the 5th chakra as well. So this whole area, all these threads are nagas of creation, emanating, birthing from the back. It creates a refinement of every impulse of feeling that is produced in our hearts. So it's like having, my kids used to play video games, it's like having a bonus. It's like getting a bonus. That before we had waves of loving gratitude that went from us to others, and that was good and it had a positive effect. But now the effect is like, it's modified to be more refined than it was before. And that increased refinement is causing the impulses of sweetness that emanate from our hearts to massage the area between unmanifest being and manifest, finest manifest. And so integration is taking place in that area. And this was an integration that I was actually hoping would come forward yesterday, but it started at the beginning of the session and it didn't happen. But we had to go through this big loop of all these different healings and layers of understanding, opening up our appreciation and comprehension of our role and our place in this big play, the big cosmic play, in order to benefit from integration, benefit from an integration taking place at a level of our being that's going to really make a concrete difference and improvement, a concrete upgrade for all of us in our ability to awaken and expand consciousness. Okay, I just realized that my box is over my question box, so I didn't know if people are asking questions. I want to say one more thing and then we are going to questions. So I don't want to lose that thing because it was really important. Oh yeah. Awakening. Okay, so one of the points I brought up yesterday from my good friend David Buckland, who's been looking at the awakening process for ages and has a lot of great material and great things to say about that, is that people awaken differently. Different nervous systems process the awakening transformation in different ways. And what I was looking at this morning was how also different parts of our physiology transcend or experience the source of creation differently. And what can happen is one isolated part of the physiology can experience transcendental consciousness, while another part is like feeling ill and not well that day. And so it's possible for the system, both for us as a big collective, for us to awaken in different patterns. One person awakens over here and then somebody else awakens over here, somebody else awakens over there, but it's also inside our physiologies, because remember, we don't want to do this. We're in our physiologies, right? This is also a physiological process, that the physiology can awaken in different patterns, different parts of the physiology. And very often, if a part of your body becomes ill or falls sick or falls under the influence of an imbalance, it's because that particular part of the physiology is ready to awaken to its next level. That's the purification that comes right before the cognition. So I'm just feeling into our collective and into people's physiologies, into the areas of the physiologies that require the most, that are like most ready to pop to their next level up, their next level of awakening or expansion of consciousness. And what we're doing is we're, in those areas of the physiology, we're using the organ as an instrument to produce that little wave of love. Because, oh, if a plant can love, well, my pinky can love. It's not just my heart, right? My eyeball can love. My liver can love, right? Whatever's the part that needs. So the organ produces that wave and it filters through the cords that are coming out the back. And therefore it gets that little extra boost of refinement, oiling up the relationship between non-manifest source of creation and the finest relative level of that area of the physiology that requires support. Just like talking to the plants. First we give, right? First we give. So the organ that's unhappy or unhealthy or not feeling well, it gives first, even in its state. This is like me doing a live webinar for expansion of consciousness. What do I know about expansion of consciousness? Well, anyway, I have my own perspectives on it, obviously, but I am not more of an expert on your expansion of consciousness than you are. I'm not. What do I know? What does the liver know about love? What do the ovaries know about love? What do the ears know about love? They know enough that they can hook up with the system that we now have established in place in order to produce an effect that ripples out to the whole causal field of creation and integrates unmanifest source of creation with the finest relative. Yes.
Soma, like waves of soma going on.
Soma. Yes, thank you for bringing up the word soma. For those of you who are not familiar with that word, soma is the finest. What is it like? It's like a light medicine, right? It's like a very, very fine product, byproduct of consciousness. They say it's the byproduct of the digestion when an individual has stabilized cosmic consciousness. But another person also emailed me in this morning and mentioned soma. So I appreciate that you mentioned that. Yes.
Chemical that supports love too.
Oh yeah, right. I remember that. The old TTC days. Yes, it's the chemical that supports refined perception. Thanks for bringing that up. And then the refined perception, the continued refinement of perception, is one of the great experiences or structures on the way to enlightenment, on the way to expansion of consciousness. Here's a question. Can you please comment on the music of the spheres? Music of the spheres responsible for the harmonious functioning of the universe, and do a healing for us being in tune with it. Oh, what a luscious question. So, just as the plants are in tune with the weather, essentially we are already in tune with the music of the spheres because we're in the soup of their resonant influence. However, the healing is for awakening. It's for recognizing or perceiving the connection with that. And the music of the spheres is that hum that I've referred to in previous webinars, that hum of creation, which people will notice, everybody I've ever talked to notices that when awareness settles down and becomes more refined, at the same time it also is more likely that one hears that humming, sometimes buzzing, sometimes like the chirping of crickets. Sometimes people describe that sound in many different ways, but it's like the resonant vibration of the whole universe in which we are functioning, in which we are seated. So this is where the soma comes in, as we've been doing these healings, which are oiling up. The healing is sitting at that junction between the unmanifest level of creation and then its finest manifest level. And you could say the music of the spheres and the planets is also the resonant hums. It is the resonance of the causal field of creation. If you hear that buzzing sound, you're actually hearing what the causal field sounds like. It can be experienced synesthetically, across the senses. And what I'm seeing for that is a rise in a wave of energy coming up through the cord of light, through the lower area of the physiology, where, as I mentioned yesterday, we tend to experience the universe in a less filtered manner. So the specifics, the information of how our physiology interfaces with the causal field in order to comprehend its nature completely, like when I say synesthesically, I mean like with all the senses crossing over all the senses. Just the pure energy, the energy bodies, our energy bodies can clue in directly with the causal level of our own energy bodies. So again, this is consciousness folding in on its own nature right there. The causal field is doing a little internal loop on itself, where it's like the causal body is going, oh, I'm looking at myself. Oh, well, that's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for this. Oh, great question. So causal body can look at itself from the causal perspective. This I am feeling is so wonderful. It's being offered into the source of creation to loop to infinity, so that the causal body stabilizes a state of constantly looking into its own nature, constantly reflecting its own nature. Okay. That's all I can do to not hum. Time for a little toning, anyone? No. Okay. So that's just happening, and it's what's happening, what I'm experiencing as a feeling, as the byproduct on the feeling level of the causal body, is tremendous lightness, happiness, bliss. One of the questions that came up on the email had to do with those points of bliss in the body. Oh, and that related to the soma. That was the question that came in the email. Is that yesterday we were looking at different structures or functions in the physiology that are related to our experience of bliss. And there was some healing for those areas. And yes, that it appears to be that light which comes out of the causal field folding into its own nature is soma. When the causal body looks at itself, it produces soma. And I'm just feeling that flowing, just flowing and stabilizing, and how I'm looking at how it affects the other layers of the physiology, because it can come all the way up into the dense material level of self. Beautiful. We've got some questions over here in the chat. And sorry, guys, my chat window is in this weird spot, so hang on a second. Okay, one lady's saying synchronicity. Today she sat in the forest and felt a lot more stable and supported, and that had exchanged blessings for the first time in ages with nature, and it felt so gentle, so beautiful. That would be our goddess in Scotland. Why am I not surprised? Anyway, so beautiful. Here's someone saying that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi said that in terms of power for transmutation, first is mantras, second is gem, and third is herbs. Yes, thank you for that, because there are so many conduits for the transcending process. One of the things that's interesting to me is that, well, there's actually a little book called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, and it's in the back. They've taken a section out of the Shiva Puranas and listed where Shiva's talking to his consort, and she asks him about transcending, and he lists 108 sacred ways to transcend. So mantras, gems, herbs, plus like another 105 sacred ways. And then there are also non-sacred ways to transcend, and so that's all a whole nother thing. And plant medicines, somebody says. Do ancestors include siblings, and do they get increased health and awareness? The answer is yes. Oh, I'm so happy to be able to go through these questions right here at the end. So here we are. Here's like one little person, and I do a healing for my ancestors. So it goes from me back to my mother and father, and then to 4, and then to 8, and then to 16, like that, back through the the ancestral archive. But when the ancestors receive a healing, then what happens is it comes from that archive forward in time. It also reflects back. Remember, nature of consciousness reflecting, right? So the healing for the ancestors reflects to the present level, the present generation, and absolutely blesses our children and our siblings and everybody else. Aunts and uncles, everyone benefits. Thanks for that great question. Is touching the dark side one of the causes of our modern day definition of anxiety? Okay, that's a good question. My perspective on modern day anxiety is related to the fact that sometimes individuals haven't organized their inner landscape. I mean, that's what we're doing in energy healing. Basically, we're organizing our inner structure of our physiology, our inner structure of our being. And so if that hasn't been organized sufficiently, or I would say aligned with Dharma, then what happens is the response to outside influences can be one of kind of like recoiling and freaking out and feeling scared. And again, that's something that can be passed through from the ancestors as well. But generally, the anxiety, anger, fear, frustration, etc., rise up when we're in the purification part of the cycle of evolution of consciousness. So consciousness is evolving with or without us, okay? Consciousness, the divine, is self-interacting, and it's going to evolve whether we're engaged or not. And that's going to be going through this loop of awakening of cognition, and then integration of the new information, and then creating a platform for greater purification, which then gives rise to the cognition again. So anytime we're in the purification part of that cycle, there can be, the potential is there for feelings of anxiety or fear or anger or frustration or things going wrong, getting sick, all kinds of experiences like that. As for the dark side of creation, the dark side of creation is the intentional or unintentional activation at a causal level of the physiology of an influence. Remember, anytime we make an activation in the causal field, it goes systemically to the whole field. So an activation which is showing what's not life-supporting. It indicates, it points to, it illustrates, it brings to the surface some aspect of self which is now ready to transcend. Remember, I was saying sometimes just specific areas are ready to transcend. And so if the area is ready to transcend and it knows it, but we don't know it because we're busy, like, I don't know, shopping or making lunch or answering emails or something, then that area of the body will start to cry. Yeah, right. It's like texting. We're too busy texting, right, on ourselves, looking at, I don't know, Instagram or something. I don't know what people look at. But anyway, then that part of the physiology will start to cry. And sometimes it can come up as a feeling of anxiety in the heart, emotional discord, or a response to something in the environment. And it's very, very important at this point. I know we're over time, but I just have to say this one more point because it's super important. And that is, do not ever think that the reason that you feel anxious or that a person feels angry or frustrated or whatever the different emotion coming up is the fault of the thing that was the trigger. That thing is only a trigger. It's a trigger to cause one to look and go, oh, I'm not feeling good about this. What do I need to look at? And what part of me right here that's crying needs my attention in order to awaken to the next level of expanded consciousness? So it's not somebody else's fault or the fault of the situation. And I know it's so easy to think that, and I know the ancestors have been holding that story for a really long time. So we're having to not reflect it back to them. But when that impulse comes up to blame, we, rather than reflecting back to the ancestors, oh yes, it's their fault that I'm upset, we have to hold steady. And that's where I was saying that actually brings us full circle on this webinar. Only 5 minutes over, not too bad. To trying to be good here. It brings us full circle, because what energy healing is doing, what we're really looking at in energy healing, is how do we deal with these transformations in a way that produces an uplifting effect, always, always, always as a byproduct of whatever happens, no matter how horrible something is. Always the byproduct is an upliftment to ourselves and others. And that's where energy healing gets right in there, in that little, just like this, these cords coming out the back, they get right in that junction between finest level of feeling and the absolute, in order to create, to promote an enhancement to the process. Okay, well, obviously there's more that could be said about that, but we are out of time. I love you all dearly. Thank you, beautiful session. Thank you, beautiful people, everyone, for being with me. You have no idea how beloved you are to me. I go over my list before these sessions and I look at everybody's name, and I spend a few minutes with each one of you and feel such indescribable gratitude for the opportunity to do these sessions with everybody and to experience the amazing transformations, which are, as I mentioned to my husband, permanent transformations. So thank you for all of us together, and with deepest gratitude and much love to everyone. I wish you a beautiful holiday season. And reminder to everyone, next webinar in 2 weeks, not 3. And then after that, it's a 4-week break because of the holidays. So see you soon. See you in a couple of weeks. Bye.